Let's talk about the New York Rangers hiring their new head coach, Gerard Gallant, 57 years old. This deal is a 4-year deal. He most recently coached the Vegas Golden Knights, where he led the team to a Stanley Cup Finals appearance in their inaugural season. Gallant was Vegas head coach from 2017 to 2020. He also previously coached 3 years with the Florida Panthers in the mid-2010s and then 3 years with the Columbus Blue Jackets from 2003 to 2007. Obviously, there was the strike in 2004 where the NHL did not have a season. So, Hank, I see one common trend with Gerard Gallant. Before we dig deep into this, Gallant has been a 3-year head coach for his previous 3 teams. So that's an interesting little factoid there. Any thoughts on that?
Well, to be honest, I don't really think that's indicative of what Gerard Gallant is as a coach. Like, I can't really comment too much about his time in Columbus. They obviously didn't have a great team, and this was really before. I don't really have any memory of those Blue Jackets teams. However, what I can tell you is the Florida Panthers team he guided the playoffs in 2016 was 2 seasons off of a really bad year. I believe they had like 60 or 70 something points 2 seasons before. So he did a really good job getting them in the playoffs. Now, how they lost and what happened in the playoffs to them was a really tough one. I think they lost 3 games in that series in overtime to the Islanders, and there was a really controversial Game 6. So that series, at the very least, should have probably gone to the full 7. But otherwise, he really did a good job turning the Florida Panthers around. The problem with what happened in his Florida tenure wasn't so much him. It was the fact that I think Dale Talon, I think he retired, and then he ended up coming back later eventually, but they ended up getting a new GM, and he like totally changed the whole team around Gallant during his like last year with Florida. And I think deep down he kind of knew the writing was on the wall that he was going to get fired. How they handled his firing is another matter entirely, and was really poor. If you remember, I think they pretty much sent him home in a taxi cab after like a 4-game losing streak and like 22 games this season. And really that goes to show you how badly run the Florida Panthers are as an organization. I mean, for crying out loud, this team doesn't even play downtown Miami. And if anything, they play like on the outskirts of like Fort Lauderdale or something. And when you look at them compared to the other Florida team, it's night and day to see who's the better run organization. But in any event, I don't really fault him for that one. With Vegas, again, nothing but praise there. He led them to the Stanley Cup Finals his first year. Remember, it's funny how everyone was calling that team like a rigged roster, considering how they built the team after like the expansion draft, but yet somehow they made it, and like everyone was saying, oh, that team had no shot at doing anything before the season. He won 54 games in their first season. I'm pretty sure that's a record among expansion teams, if I'm not mistaken. So pretty decent job. I know the second year they had a pretty decent run too. Unfortunately, they had a choke in the first round against the San Jose Sharks. But, you know, last year, again, that made even less sense than Florida getting rid of him, because they were, at one point, they were in first place for the majority of the season. To fire him after a 4-game losing streak, I think, was kind of irrational. And the fact that they didn't really let him stay around to turn around, it made no sense. But you know what? I'm glad he was still around. I think this is an excellent hire for the Rangers. This is a guy who like emphasizes speed and skill. And when you look at the way the current roster is made, I think that's really important. And I think that's definitely the better hire. And remember, it's why I didn't want John Tortorella, for the opposite reason. And Brian, I have to say, you are damn right. The Rangers are always going to be the main story in New York hockey. LGR always, my guy.
Let's go Rangers. That's right. Brian Attard, thank you so much for the comment. And here's my thing. In Florida, it seemed like that was more the Panthers than Gallant. Vegas, we know what happened with that. Columbus, wasn't very old when that happened, wasn't also too big into hockey back then, but I know Gallant is fresh off leading Team Canada to a 27th gold medal at the IIHF World Championships, and I really do like this hire for the Rangers. Once the Rangers let Dave Quinn go, I had a feeling this was going to be the name that was brought in, because the Rangers are a very storied franchise that obviously they haven't won a championship in 27 years, but this is a team that, they're the Class A team of New York hockey. Even though the Islanders are the better team at the moment, the Rangers are on the upcome. So I think bringing him in is an outstanding move, especially now that you have such a competitive Eastern Conference. Hank, what does Gallant bring to the table that makes him a better coach than David Quinn?
I think he's the coach that I think has the more experience, and I think he can probably get that team to the next step. I think he can further develop some of the younger guys that they have. I'll tell you a few guys that could really benefit from his style of play. Pavel Buchnevich, Alexis Lafreniere, and Capo Caco, to name a few. So, again, when you have a team that's really designed on finesse, speed, and skill, you definitely need a guy like Gerard Gallant, and I think he's very compatible with what the Rangers bring to the table. Now, of course, I also happen to agree with Sal. I think it would be nice to bring in some tough guys for the fourth line, because we saw some moments during the season where the Rangers were kind of kicked around and beaten, and I really hope they can learn from that. And I think Drury can definitely get in some of those guys. Let's just hope he doesn't sign anyone to a stupid long-term contract.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. You don't know if the Rangers are going to change a lot of the faces on this roster, because when a new head coach is hired, that usually means faces are going to change in the locker room. So you hope the Rangers are able to keep some of their core players. And obviously with the new Seattle team coming in this year, we're not sure who the Rangers will lose from that expansion draft. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see. And I do have another question for you on Gallant, Hank. You mentioned how it's about speed with him. Buchnevich will be a player that benefits from him, just to name one. How will he deal with this young core of players? Obviously, the Rangers are a very young and talented team. How do you think he's going to deal with that young core? For instance, Capo Caco has been very inconsistent his first 2 seasons. Alexis Lafreniere, it took him until about mid-season to hit his stride. How is he going to help those 2 players and the rest of that young core?
I think maybe he gets them more ice time or something. He probably puts him like on a higher line with the guy and looks for the right amount of chemistry or something like that. I think that's probably what you should see from Gallant.
Yeah, and Sal brought up an interesting comment too before about that 4th checking line. What do you think about this? That 4th checking line to go against teams' number 1 lines. We also need a big-time young center with size and skill. I don't know who you think they could potentially bring in as a young center with size and skill, but I found this comment actually very interesting from Sal. What do you think about that?
Well, let me start with the young center line. I think there there is a young center that is very disgruntled about his situation in Buffalo, and rightfully so. Of course, if you read between the lines, I'm talking about Jack Eichel, and considering what's been going on with him and how badly he wants out and how much of a mess everything is, it might not take a lot to get him, actually. And I have to say, if getting Jack Eichel as a center could be the missing piece to the Rangers not winning a cup, I think you absolutely have to get that deal done. I think Jack Eichel presents a lot of skill. Like, anyone who thinks that guy was really the problem in Buffalo, you really need to look at that team and what was going on, or like surrounding them. It was not, he was the best player on that team by far, and there was not even a close second, unless maybe you had Taylor Hall. But again, you just had those 2 players. That team was just an absolute mess. And yeah, I definitely agree with the 4th line. We had some good guys who were like had the skills, but also the toughness. I would have loved if they had kept a guy like Brendan Lemieux, but that was a trade that I really was not too happy about, and they didn't really get much for him. I would love to have somebody like a Brendan Lemieux on that 4th line, but I definitely think toughness would be something that they could use on that 4th line, because, as I said, if you really watch them towards the end of that season, like, every time that something big happened, every time there was like a big scuffle, they lost their momentum. Like, look at the Islanders series, for example. They got crushed in those last few games. And then, of course, the ultimate example was the Capitals games where Tom Wilson like decked Artemi Panarin. That was a total mess. So I think that's pretty much what Chris Drury is going to have his eyes on when he like tries to fix the Rangers.
You mentioned Jack Eichel earlier, and there was a poll today. I think Brian Attard was the one that actually created the poll on his Blue Truth page. Jack Eichel has been linked to the Rangers, potentially the only one team that would trade for him. And I'm not going to get into the logistics of that and what the Rangers may or may not give up to get him. But would you prefer to have Jack Eichel, 24-year-old young player, or would you prefer to have a guy like Barkov? I think that's a really tough question because
Oh
they're
my
both around the
gosh.
same age.
Tom, you're putting me on the spot here. I mean,
How to ask the question.
Barkov's like, don't get me wrong, Eichel is great. The only thing is, I don't know what Buffalo is going to want for them. They probably know how deep our like young players are, so they may be asking a lot. Barkov could be another good option. I really think either one. I would probably lead with Barkov just a little bit because I think we know Eichel's like mouthed off a little bit about his situation. I know a lot of teams might see him as a bit of a cancer, which isn't really that fair in my honest opinion. Because, like I said, look what he's had to deal with in Buffalo. Not that good of a situation, but I think Barkov is definitely a young rising star that could also benefit the Rangers for sure.
Yeah, Eichel's injury history scares me a little bit, but I think he might be the better fit out of the two, although Barkov might have the higher ceiling. That's just the way I view it.
There's really two ways you can look at that.
I think they have to make a move for one of those two players. I mean, you're playing in the Big Apple, and my last question to you, Hank, is what type of energy? I know you go to a lot of Rangers games.
Yes.
What type of energy are you expecting to see at the Garden this next season with Gerard Gallant as the head coach? Do you think there will be a different type of energy, like a new edition of the New York Rangers?
I think you might see a good amount of good addition. Sorry, what am I trying to say? You might see a good amount of like vibes going into the Garden. I think you might see like some excitement for a positive new change, but then again, you might see some fans that are a little bit salty and understandably so over letting go of John Davidson and what's the other guy? Gorton. Because I don't be wrong. As much as I think the Rangers have a bright future, I'm still a little bit stung over what happened there. But nonetheless, I think with Gerard Gallant and the core they already have right now and the potential they have years down the line, I think it should be a really good vibe. And gosh, this was like the first season I didn't even go to a Ranger game since like I want to say maybe 2009 something. It's been that long. I can't wait to see what it's like once I go back to the Garden. It's going to be a lot of fun. And Tom, one of these days you got to join me for a game one day, for sure.
Yeah, what really sucked was we were supposed to go
right
before the pandemic, like right when everything shut down, like that date in March. I think it was March 12th or 14th, something like that.
It was the 14th, but nonetheless, I still owe you a game there, buddy.
We'll figure something out. We'll definitely get a plan in the works. Maybe we'll invite Brian as well.
Yes,
maybe he'll trickle up from Jersey.
I would love to have him join us.
We'll figure something out. And Brian actually has a comment. He says, trade for Eichel, LTIR all season, and bring him back for the playoffs, LOL.
That's actually mad smart. I'm not going to lie. I would not be opposed to that at all, actually.
What a way to end it, right? Hank, any final thoughts you want to add?
Listen, just because the Islanders are making a deep run, and look, I hate to say it, I got to give them credit where credit is due. They're a good team. They're good to watch, as painful it is for me to admit. But let's always remember, this is New York. This is a Ranger town. LGR, baby, all day, every day.
True blue. And Brian's already in. So, Brian, we'll see you up here at MSG.
Absolutely.
Me and Hank living it up here in the Garden. But, Hank, thank you very much for joining me for this segment here on the New York Rangers hiring their new head coach, Gerard Gallant.